Leora always found it amusing that the world ended not with a bang, but with paperwork. She peered over stacks of dusty parchments in the monastery's musty archive, which smelled like an old sock had been marinating in despair. Of course, it wasn't really a monastery anymore, not since the aliens had shown up and decided that human nature was overdue for a software update. A big cosmic patch it or pitch it deal. Now, it was more of a human cloning lab with a strong predilection for prayer and Prozac. Damn it, Leora muttered, flicking through the pages of what was supposed to be a manual on how not to screw up human genetic code. Instead, it read like a cookbook for sociopaths. Add a pinch of morality, stir in empathy, bake until golden brown. Brotherly shuffled in his robes a patchwork of stains that told the story of every meal he'd eaten in the last month. Still trying to cook the perfect human, Leora. Yeah, she replied. If by perfect you mean doesn't stab you in the face for a can of beans. Illy chuckled, which sounded more like a dying cat's final yodel. Good luck with that. Xylox came by earlier, said something about a necessary acceleration in the process. His voice dripped with sarcasm like a bad faucet. Leora groaned, feeling the weight of the aliens' demands pressing down like a thumb on an ant. Great, just what we need. More pressure from our benevolent overlords. Xylox, the enigmatic alien consultant, had the charm of a used airlock salesman and the patience of a caffeine-deprived human. He was their alien overseer, and his mission was clear: make humans non-violent or else. Nobody was quite sure what or else entailed, but given the alien penchant for vaporizing civilizations, it was safe to assume it involved a lot of cleaning up. As if on cue, the air shimmered and crackled with the static of interdimensional travel, and Xylox materialized in the corner of the room. His entrance was less about subtlety and more about look at me, I'm from space. Good day, Leora, Xylox said in a voice that was a mix between a buzzing insect and a malfunctioning speaker. I trust you are making progress. Leora resisted the urge to roll her eyes into another dimension. Oh sure, we're just about to solve millennia of human dysfunction with a bit of DNA tampering. Easy peasy, the alien's eyes, or what passed for eyes, narrowed. Sarcasm is not productive. Neither is genocide, Leora quipped, leaning back in her chair, which creaked in protest. Xylox ignored the jab, gliding across the floor like a ghost who had misplaced its chains. The timeline must be accelerated. The council grows. Impatient, huh? That's a fancy way of saying hurry up or else, isn't it? Illy chimed in, scratching at his patchy beard. Xylox's face, a mass of shifting metallic hues, remained unreadable. Precisely. Leora tapped her fingers on the table, her mind racing through the labyrinth of ethical dilemmas that came with her job. Look, you can't just rush evolution. Or you can, but that's how you end up with a species that thinks reality TV is a viable career path. The alien paused, calculating his next move as if playing a game of cosmic chess. Human violence is a virus. You must find the cure. And if we don't, Leora asked, her voice tinged with defiance. Xylox tilted his head, the alien equivalent of a shrug. Then humanity will become obsolete. The word hung in the air like a bad smell, lingering long after the alien vanished with a flicker of light. Silence blanketed the room, heavy and suffocating. Illy sighed, the noise echoing off the stone walls. Obsolete, that's a fancy way of saying bye-bye Earth. Tell me about it, Leora replied, staring at the genetic charts spread across the table. We're one bad day away from being replaced by a bunch of genetically modified puppy people or something. Illy chuckled again, an unsettling sound that mixed well with the monastery's grim ambience. Could be worse, could be a cat people. God forbid, Leora muttered, pushing the charts aside. She glanced out the window at the ruined landscape that used to be Earth. A world where the past clung on like a stubborn stain, refusing to be washed away. Illy followed her gaze, his eyes squinting at the horizon. You think we'll pull it off? Leora shrugged, a nonchalant gesture that belied the turmoil inside. Beats me. But hey, if humanity's good at anything, it's pretending we know what we're doing. Outside, the sky was an unremarkable gray, a color that seemed to have seeped into every corner of their lives. Somewhere in the distance, a spire from a forgotten city jutted out like a crooked finger, a reminder of what once was and what might never be again. I suppose we better get back to it then, Illy said, breaking the silence. Leora nodded, though her mind was elsewhere, drifting through the possibilities of a future without humans. Yes, because if we don't, Xylox might just decide to give the cockroaches a chance. They both laughed, a sound filled with bitterness and hope, as they turned back to their work. The hours slipped by in a haze of genetic code and caffeine, their only company the distant hum of the monastery's machines and the ever-present sense of impending doom. As the day bled into night, the two caretakers slogged through the labyrinth of DNA strands, attempting to untangle the mess that was human nature. Suddenly, a soft chime echoed through the room, signaling an incoming transmission. Leora pushed a button, and the holographic image of Xylox appeared again, this time with an expression that might have been urgency or possibly indigestion. It was hard to tell with aliens. "Progress report," Xylox demanded, his tone brooking no nonsense. Leora glanced at her partner, then back at the alien. "Well, we haven't yet eliminated humanity's tendency to go berserk over minor inconveniences, but we did manage to get a mouse to stop being an asshole. So baby steps." Xylox's eyes flickered, perhaps a sign of alien annoyance. "The council requires more significant results. Tell them we're on it," Illy said, leaning back with a casualness that bordered on reckless. "Can't rush genius, right?" The alien disappeared without another word, leaving behind a silence that spoke volumes. Leora sighed, rubbing her temples. "This is going to be the death of us." Illy grinned, unfazed by the looming threat. "Or it could be the start of something new. Imagine a world where people don't kill each other over parking spaces." "Yeah," Leora mused, her voice a soft whisper. "Imagine that." The monastery creaked ominously as the wind picked up outside, a storm brewing on the horizon. It was a fitting backdrop for their desperate task, a reminder that nature was always one step away from reclaiming its throne. And yet, amidst the chaos and the uncertainty, a spark of determination lingered in the air. Leora glanced at Illy, her eyes alight with a fierce resolve. "Let's get back to it." "We've got a species to save." Illy nodded, a rare seriousness settling over him. "Right behind you. Besides, I hear the alternative involves really bad alien music." Together, they turned back to their work, their laughter echoing through the halls as the storm raged outside. It was a sound full of life, defiant and stubborn, much like humanity itself. And as the night stretched on, the two caretakers worked tirelessly, fueled by caffeine and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, they could save their world from becoming obsolete. Leora rubbed the sleep from her eyes, the flickering light from the monitors casting a sickly glow over the cluttered mess that had evolved into her workspace. The monastery's stone walls loomed like ancient sentinels, silently judging her progress or lack thereof. She'd been on this genetic puzzle for so long that she was beginning to wonder if her brain was slowly turning to mush. "Where the hell is the how to make humans less stabby for dumb as manual when you need it?" she muttered, thumbing through another stack of charts that seemed to have been organized by a drunk octopus. Illy sidled up, his robe swishing like a plastic bag in the wind. "It's probably in the same place as How to Survive an Alien Overhaul Without Losing Your Mind." Leora snorted. "Sounds like a bestseller." As she pushed aside a particularly stubborn stack of papers, something caught her eye. A small, almost invisible lever, clearly designed to be overlooked. Because when you're redesigning humanity, what you really need are secret compartments. "Well, what do we have here?" she mused aloud, her fingers twitching with curiosity. "Maybe it's a stash of alien snacks," Illy suggested, eyes twinkling with mischief. "Or, the button that turns on the monastery's jacuzzi." Ignoring Illy's ramblings, Leora pulled the lever. With a groan that suggested it hadn't been used since the dinosaurs were worrying about their meteor insurance, a section of the wall slid back to reveal a dusty chamber. Inside, rows of ancient data cylinders were neatly stacked, forgotten relics of a time when people still thought VHS tapes were the future. "Wow," Illy said, peering over her shoulder. "Either someone had a serious hoarding problem, or we just hit the jackpot." Leora picked up one of the cylinders, eyeing it with a mix of trepidation and excitement. "Let's see what humanity's past has to say about our present." Illy rolled his eyes. "Right, because historical records are always the answer. Just like those old cookbooks that tell you to boil everything until it's flavorless." Ignoring his cynicism, Leora plugged the cylinder into a nearby data reader. The machine whirred to life, and a holographic projection burst into the air, a dizzying montage of human history that was equal parts inspiring and embarrassing. Wars, peace treaties, revolutions, and disco. All of it spinning around like an insane carousel. "Well, would you look at that?" Illy murmured, genuinely impressed for once. "We've always been a bit unpredictable, haven't we?" "More like consistently inconsistent," Leora replied, watching as the projection shifted to showcase moments of human ingenuity, moon landings, medical breakthroughs, the invention of the coffee machine. "But still, maybe there's something here we can use." Illy scratched his head. "Yeah, like a reminder that we've always been one wrong turn away from chaos." Leora leaned in, trying to make sense of the swirling images. "Look, every time we were on the brink of disaster, someone came up with a solution, even if it was just a band-aid on a bullet wound." "True, but remember, we're not trying to fix broken legs here. We're talking about rewiring the human brain." Illy waved a hand through the hologram, scattering the images like a digital sandcastle. "And we have an alien audience with a short fuse." "Yes, about that," Leora said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You ever wonder if maybe Xylox and his buddies have their definition of nonviolence slightly skewed?" Illy chuckled darkly. "Probably a fine line between pacifism and lobotomy in their book." As if summoned by their chatter, the air crackled and Xylox materialized again, a picture of alien impatience. "Progress update," he intoned, cutting straight to business. Leora smirked, gesturing to the holographic display. "Turns out humanity's been pretty good at not completely screwing up most of the time. You should try taking notes." The alien's metallic features shifted, giving the impression of a frown. "The Council requires more aggressive measures. Your time is limited." "Right," Illy said, "because rushing complex genetic manipulation has never gone wrong before." Xylox ignored the jab. "The pacification program will commence. You are to expedite your efforts." Leora's stomach twisted. "Commence? As in we start converting more humans to our way of thinking," the alien clarified, his tone as flat as a pancake in a steamroller's path. "Great," Leora said dryly. "Nothing like a bit of alien mind control to brighten up your day." Xylox's gaze bore into hers, an unnerving sensation akin to being probed by an invisible dentist. "Failure is not an option." Leora met his gaze with a defiance that was growing dangerously familiar. "We'll see about that." The alien faded from view, leaving behind a tension so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. Illy shook his head, his usual humor momentarily overshadowed by a shadow of concern. "This is getting out of hand, Leora. Tell me something I don't know," she replied, her mind still preoccupied with the images of human resilience that had danced before her eyes. Illy leaned against the table, his eyes searching hers. "You thinking of going off book? Maybe throwing a wrench in the alien works?" Leora's lips curled into a wicked grin. "Might be time to remind our overseers that humanity doesn't like being backed into a corner." "Bold move," Illy said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "But if anyone can pull it off, it'd be you. As long as we don't end up as alien karaoke. Keep the faith, brother Illy," she said, clapping a hand on his back. "We've got some coding to do." They returned to their screens, fingers flying over keyboards as they raced against the clock. The hidden chamber had sparked something within Leora, a stubborn determination to prove that humanity was more than just a collection of flaws and failures. "Think this'll work?" Illy asked, glancing up from his terminal. "It better," Leora replied, her voice resolute. "Because I'm not keen on finding out what obsolete feels like." The hours ticked by, marked by the soft click of keys and the low hum of the monastery's machinery. Outside, the storm had grown in fury, lashing against the stone walls like a petulant child denied their dessert. Inside, Leora and Illy labored tirelessly, fueled by caffeine and a lingering, unyielding spark of hope. Eventually, exhaustion claimed Illy, his head nodding as he succumbed to an impromptu nap. Leora watched him for a moment, a fond smile playing on her lips. The monk was a constant in her chaotic existence, his wry humor a reminder that even in the darkest times, laughter was a potent weapon. Turning back to her work, she immersed herself in the genetic code, hunting for the elusive sequence that would tip the scales in their favor. It was a dangerous game they were playing, but one she was determined to win. The night passed in a blur, and as dawn broke, painting the sky with muted hues, Leora finally leaned back, her mind a whirl of fatigue and triumph. She'd found something, a potential breakthrough that might just give them the edge they needed. "Illy," she called softly, rousing him from his slumber. He blinked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "I think I've got it." His eyes sharpened, the sleepiness all but forgotten. "You serious? Serious as an alien invasion," she replied, a grin stretching across her face. Illy's laughter rang out, a rich sound that cut through the tension like a beacon. "Well, let's not keep our friends waiting then." Together, they dove back into the task, refining the new code with the care and precision of artisans sculpting a masterpiece. It was a race against time, but they were fueled by a determination that burned brighter than a supernova. As the day wore on, the realization hit them both. This was it, their last, best hope to save humanity from the aliens' clutches. It was a gamble, a bold move that could either solidify their future or doom them to extinction. "Here's to hoping the Council appreciates our handiwork," Illy muttered, fingers flying over the keys. Leora chuckled, a wicked glint in her eyes. "Or at the very least that they don't vaporize us." The storm outside had finally abated, leaving in its wake a world washed clean by rain. In the monastery, however, the tension remained, a reminder of the stakes at play. With a final keystroke, Leora leaned back, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "It's done," she announced, her voice a mix of relief and exhilaration. Illy clapped her on the back, his grin infectious. "Let's show these aliens what humans are really made of." As they prepared to present their solution, Leora allowed herself a moment to reflect. The journey had been long and fraught with peril, but they'd made it. They'd faced the odds and come out swinging. Now all that remained was to see if their gamble would pay off, if the Council would accept their work, or if, like so many others before them, they would become just another footnote in the annals of history. One thing was certain: whatever the outcome, they wouldn't go down without a fight. After all, they were human, and if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was surviving against all odds. "So, Leora," Illy said, breaking the silence, "you think we'll manage to give the council a run for their money?" Leora smirked, her eyes alight with determination. "Only one way to find out. Let's do this." Leora sat hunched over her data console, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. The monastery was eerily quiet, broken only by the occasional creak of ancient stone and the soft hum of machinery. Lee was off somewhere, presumably sleeping or contemplating the universe's unending cruelty, his two favorite pastimes. Eric, the rebellious monk who joined their little band of misfits, was crouched by a cluttered table. He was a wiry sort, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing and a mouth permanently twisted in a sardonic grin. His robe was stained, no doubt from some ill-fated attempt at cooking. Or sabotage. With Eric, it was hard to tell. "You know, Leora," he began, not looking up from the array of archaic tools and digital relics in front of him, "if I had a credit for every time someone said, 'Humanity's doomed,' I'd have enough to buy myself a planet with a nice view, mostly of nothing." Leora snorted, fingers dancing across the keyboard. "Well, congratulations. You're officially richer than us all, philosophically speaking." "Philosophy wasn't what I signed up for in monk school," Eric replied, slotting a data cylinder into a reader with the finesse of a drunk performing brain surgery. "But here we are, blessed with the task of saving humanity from itself." Again, the holographic projection flickered to life, casting a dim glow across the room. More snippets of human history, all mixed in a slurry of triumph and catastrophe. It was like watching a highlight reel of the galaxy's most dysfunctional family. "Look," Eric said, pointing to a scene depicting the invention of the internet. Humans connected the world, only to use it for cat videos and arguing with strangers. "It was probably the cat's plan all along," Leora replied dryly as she scanned lines of code. "Whatever it takes to survive, right?" Eric mused, fiddling with the console until it spat out a string of alien script. He squinted at it like it was an overdue tax notice. "Xylox and his pals up there trying to plug us into some cosmic serenity, yet they can't figure out why we like our chaos." "Maybe chaos is the point," Leora said, eyes darting over the hologram. "All those wars, all that noise, and somehow we still managed to pop out the other side with a few good ideas. Like coffee machines," Eric added, nodding appreciatively. Leora chuckled, her gaze settling on a particular frame displaying the anatomy of a brain, human neurons glistening like stars. "You ever think we're just trying to outsmart our own self-destructive tendencies?" Eric leaned back, crossing his arms. "Sure, but then we invent something like reality TV, and I start to wonder if self-destruction's just a hobby." The two shared a moment of silent camaraderie, the kind that comes with mutual exasperation and a shared goal. Somewhere in these dusty records lay the key to reminding the aliens that humans were never meant for cages, no matter how plush the bars. "Look at this," Leora said, highlighting a section of DNA sequence. "There's a discrepancy here, something the aliens overlooked." Eric peered closer, eyebrows arching. "You saying we've got a crack in the prison walls, more like a hairline fracture," Leora replied, tapping the screen, "but it could be enough. A way to reverse their tweaks and give us back a little free will." "Sounds risky," Eric remarked, though his voice carried more mischief than caution. "But then again, risk is just another word for opportunity, isn't it? Opportunity for a spectacular failure, maybe," Leora quipped, her eyes glinting with determination. "But if we pull this off, it could turn the tide." The task ahead wasn't just daunting, it was borderline suicidal, yet the prospect of outwitting their overseers was too tantalizing to ignore. Eric and Leora exchanged a knowing look. Perhaps the universe had brought them together, a pair of misfits with nothing left to lose. "Let's do it," Eric said, rolling up his sleeves with the enthusiasm of a man on the brink of a terrible decision. Leora nodded, feeling a surge of adrenaline. Time to show them that humanity's not done yet. They dove into their work, Eric offering a steady stream of sarcasm that was surprisingly effective at keeping the mood light. Leora painstakingly worked through the genetic modifications, inching ever closer to a solution they hoped would keep their minds intact and their bodies autonomous. "Think Xylox will be impressed with our handiwork?" Eric asked as he soldered a connection with more confidence than skill. "Impressed? Probably not," Leora replied, not missing a beat, but confused. "Definitely, confusion's half the battle," Eric grinned, setting aside his tools with a flourish. "If they can't predict us, they can't control us." Night stretched into day, the distant sun casting long shadows through the monastery. Leora's fingers were sore, her mind a whirl of exhaustion and anticipation. But the project was taking shape, an unholy marriage of human ingenuity and alien oversight. Lee returned, rubbing his eyes and yawning loudly. "You two look like you haven't slept in a week." "Sleep is for the weak," Eric declared, punctuating his statement with a half-hearted fist pump. "And for those not trying to rewrite the rules of alien engagement," Leora added, giving the tired monk a nod. Illy slumped into a chair, peering at their progress with bleary eyes. So do I need to start writing my will now, or are we actually onto something? We found a chink in the armor, Leora explained, gesturing to the screen. Something the aliens didn't account for in their grand plan to rewire us. Illy snorted, his humor returning with the dawn. Ah, the classic oversight. Always nice when the enemy's hubris gives you a helping hand. Just means we need to seize the opportunity, Eric said, with a wink. Before they figure out what we're up to, they pressed on, fueled by the slim chance of victory and the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. If they were going to remain human, true to themselves, then they needed to act swiftly and smartly. The world outside was changing, and they'd be damned if they were going to let it change them without a fight. Leora paused, staring at the screen, her thoughts a tangled mess of anxiety and determination. This could be our last shot. If we mess it up, Eric clapped her on the shoulder, grinning like a man with nothing to lose. Then we go down in style. Preferably screaming with laughter. Illy looked between them, his gaze steady and unwavering. Just remember, whatever happens, we did what we could, and that's more than anyone else managed. They all knew the stakes, and as much as the idea of facing an alien council with nothing but a rough plan and a few jokes seemed suicidal, they were committed. Because the alternative, a life stripped of choice and individuality, was unthinkable. With a final, collective breath, they put the last touches on their plan, a desperate but daring bid for freedom. The code was ready, the path forward as clear as it could be in a universe that thrived on chaos and uncertainty. All right, Leora said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Let's give this a shot. Illy leaned back, smirking. Here's to the crazy ones, and to the idiots trying to save them, Eric added with a chuckle. With that, they set the plan in motion, the ancient machinery around them humming with a purpose it hadn't known in centuries. If it worked, they'd have a chance to remind the aliens and themselves that human spirit couldn't be so easily extinguished. Leora watched as the sequence executed, each line of code a step closer to either redemption or ruin. Her heart thundered in her chest, a constant reminder of the stakes they faced. And then it was done. No fanfare, no fireworks, just the quiet, terrifying stillness of the unknown. Now we wait, Eric said, the words hanging in the air like a prophecy. Leora nodded, unable to shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. Whatever happened next would determine the fate of humanity, and she could only hope they'd done enough. As the first rays of dawn broke through the monastery's windows, they sat together in silence, each lost in thoughts of what the future might hold. It was a gamble, but one worth taking. Because in the end they were human, flawed, unpredictable, and stubborn as hell, and that perhaps was their greatest strength. Leora and Eric sat in the dim light of the monastery's data chamber, the quiet hum of machinery, the only sound accompanying their whispered conspiracies. The holographic projections around them flickered with images of human history, wars, great feats of engineering, and regrettable fashion choices. All set against the backdrop of an alien occupation that had about as much patience for dissent as a cat with a mouse infestation. Think they are onto us? Leora asked, glancing over her shoulder like a shoplifter in a convenience store. If they are, they're about as subtle as a meteor strike, Eric replied, peering cautiously out the narrow window. I heard Xylox increased surveillance. Apparently they're not fond of our little science project. Great, Leora murmured, rolling her eyes. Nothing says welcome like an alien nanny state creeping around every corner. Brotherly shuffled in, his robe more stained than usual. Probably another kitchen disaster. Morning, he said, suppressing a yawn, or whatever this time of day passes for in the eternal gloom. Good to see you, brother, Leora said. Hope your culinary skills didn't bring down the kitchen. Not yet, Illy grinned, though I consider it a long-term goal. Building character, one incinerated soup at a time. They exchanged weary smiles. The camaraderie was a small but precious solace in an existence that felt like a prolonged stay at an intergalactic prison. They were stuck in an endless loop of subjugation, and with surveillance ramped up, their chances of pulling off any semblance of resistance seemed about as likely as finding a winning lottery ticket in a junkyard. So, what's the plan? Illy asked, settling into a chair and crossing his arms. Or are we just sitting around waiting for Xylox to invite us for tea and finger sandwiches? We improvise, Eric said with a devil-may-care shrug. We can't let them know we're onto their little cosmic peace project or we're toast. Extra crispy. Leora nodded, her fingers tapping a rapid rhythm on the keyboard. We need a distraction. Something that says, hey, look over there, while we work our magic. Illy raised an eyebrow. Like what exactly? A light show, maybe a song and dance number. Why not all three? Eric suggested, his grin widening. They say variety is the spice of life, or was that paprika? Leora smirked, though her mind was racing with possibilities. We could engineer a malfunction in one of their monitoring devices. A glitch that's too enticing for them to ignore. Lee scratched his chin, considering. It's risky. But then we're not exactly swimming in safe options, are we? Not unless you count surrendering, Eric said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Which, personally, I don't. The trio fell silent, the weight of their decision pressing down on them like the oppressive atmosphere of a particularly moody planet. They were walking a razor's edge, and one false step could send them tumbling into oblivion. All right, Leora said finally, her gaze steady. Let's do it. A glitch in their system, something that'll give us just enough breathing room to finish what we started. And if it all goes sideways, Illy asked, though his eyes held a glint of mischief. Then we blame it on cosmic rays, Eric replied, his grin as sharp as ever. Everyone knows you can't argue with those. Cosmic rays. Right, Illy chuckled. Because when in doubt, blame the universe. Eric tapped a few keys, setting their plan into motion. Exactly, and if that fails, we can always claim it was a particularly aggressive sunspot. As they worked, the air filled with the clatter of keys and the soft hum of electronics. The monastery felt more alive than it had in ages, its ancient machinery thrumming with a sense of purpose. They were defying the odds, and it felt exhilarating. Think they'll buy it? Leora asked, her eyes never leaving the screen. If they don't, at least we'll have given them something to think about, Eric said, his tone light despite the gravity of their situation. And in the end, isn't that what life's all about? Confounding your enemies and dying spectacularly, Leora laughed, a short, sharp sound that held more defiance than humor. If we're going out, it might as well be with style. Here's to style, Illy toasted, raising an imaginary glass, and to the fools brave enough to pursue it. The plan took shape with a speed that surprised even them. Eric's fingers danced over the console, coding a virus that would worm its way into the alien surveillance systems. It was a temporary fix, but sometimes temporary was all you needed to turn the tide. All right, Leora said, taking a deep breath. Let's see if this puppy can hunt. Release the hounds, Eric agreed, pressing the final key with the dramatic flair of a man launching 1,000 ships. The tiny screen lit up with a series of cascading errors, a digital dance of chaos that promised to keep their overseers busy. It was a gamble, and the stakes were higher than ever, but it was their best shot. Now we wait, Illy said, his voice a calm counterpoint to the tension that thrummed just beneath the surface. And hope our alien friends find this as entertaining as we do. They watched, each holding their breath as the virus worked its way through the system. It was a delicate ballet of ones and zeros, a virtual assault that played havoc with the aliens' carefully laid plans. Think they'll notice? Leora asked, her voice barely a whisper. Hope so, Eric replied, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Because if they don't, we've just wasted a perfectly good virus. Time stretched, each second an eternity. They'd cast their lot into the void, and now all they could do was pray it came back in their favor. Finally, after what felt like an age, Leora breathed a sigh of relief. It's working, at least for now. The tension in the room eased, if only a fraction. They'd bought themselves a reprieve, a slender window in which to complete their true objective, reversing the alien modifications that threatened to turn humanity into nothing more than obedient drones. Let's not get too comfortable, Illy warned, though his smile was genuine. We've poked the bear. Now we need to dance around its claws. Never pegged you for a dancer, brother, Eric teased. But I suppose desperate times call for desperate pirouettes. They shared a laugh, the moment of levity a welcome balm against the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The stakes were higher than ever, and their time was running out, but for now they had hope. A slim, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. The hours crept by, each tick of the clock a reminder of the relentless march of time. They worked tirelessly, their focus unyielding as they chipped away at the alien modifications. It was meticulous, painstaking work, but necessity had a way of sharpening the mind. Think Xylox will miss us when we're gone? Leora asked, her eyes never leaving the screen. About as much as a boot misses the ant, Eric replied, his tone half serious, half joking. But who cares? We're not doing this for them. The atmosphere in the room shifted, charged with a determination that was palpable. They were fighting not just for themselves, but for everyone who'd ever dared to dream of something more than servitude under alien rule. How's it coming? Illy asked, peering over their shoulders. Better than expected, Leora answered, her fingers flying over the keyboard. We've almost got a workaround for their modifications, just a few more adjustments, and then we roll the dice, Eric finished, his grin as wild as ever. Hope Lady Luck's on our side. If she's not, Illy quipped, at least we can say we went down fighting. With style, of course. Of course, Eric agreed, nodding sagely. Never underestimate the power of a well-timed quip in the face of annihilation. As the minutes slipped by, the gravity of their mission weighed heavily upon them. They were up against insurmountable odds, facing an enemy that considered them little more than an inconvenience. But they were human, and if history had taught them anything, it was that humanity had a knack for rising from the ashes of its own folly. Finally, with a flourish that bordered on the theatrical, Leora hit the final key. There, she said, her voice a blend of exhaustion and triumph. It's done. Eric let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Now all we need is a miracle. Miracles are overrated, Illy said with a grin. What we need is a distraction. Something to keep the aliens busy while we implement the changes. Something big, Leora agreed, her mind racing with possibilities. A diversion that'll give us the time we need. Eric leaned back, crossing his arms with the air of a man contemplating a particularly challenging puzzle. Well, we could always blow something up. That tends to get attention. Tempting, Leora admitted, but maybe we should aim for subtlety. At least as much as we can manage, Illy chuckled, shaking his head. Subtlety, from the guy who suggested a pyrotechnics show. Hey, Eric protested, I never claimed to be subtle, just effective. Effective's exactly what we need, Leora said, nodding. A little chaos goes a long way. The trio put their heads together, brainstorming ideas with the fervor of desperate souls grasping at straws. They needed something audacious, something that would keep their alien overseers off balance long enough to implement their changes. How about this, Illy proposed, his eyes gleaming with mischief. We could trigger a power surge, overload their systems and send them scrambling. Eric snapped his fingers, his grin widening. Perfect. A little extra juice in the circuits and they won't know what hit him. It's risky, Leora said, considering. But if it works, it'll buy us the time we need. Then let's go for it, Eric declared, rolling up his sleeves. No guts, no glory, right? They set to work, their fingers flying over keyboards as they prepared to execute the plan. It was a bold gambit and the danger was real, but they'd come too far to back down now. Ready? Leora asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Ready? Eric and Illy replied in unison, their expressions determined. With a final breath, Leora hit the button that would unleash their carefully crafted chaos. The lights flickered, the hum of machinery rising to a crescendo as their makeshift surge strained the system to its limits. Now we wait, Illy said, watching as the alien monitors flickered to life, displaying a series of alarmed messages. They shared a glance, knowing full well the risks they'd taken. The die was cast, and all they could do was hope it landed in their favor. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room was palpable. They were playing a dangerous game, one that could end in either triumph or disaster. But they were committed, and in the end, that commitment was all they had. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos subsided, the lights stabilizing and the machinery returning to its steady hum. Their distraction had worked, and they'd bought themselves the precious time they needed. Well, Eric said, exhaling in relief, looks like we might just have a fighting chance. Leora nodded, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Let's hope it's enough. Illy clapped them both on the shoulders, his smile wide. Whatever happens, we gave it our all, and that's something to be proud of. Together, they faced the uncertain future with determination in their hearts and a fire in their souls. They were human, flawed, and resilient, and they'd just proven that even in the darkest of times, hope could still shine through. As they prepared to take the final steps of their daring plan, the weight of their mission pressed heavily upon them. But they were ready, and they'd face whatever came next with courage and defiance. No matter how it ended, they'd done the impossible. They dared to dream in the face of overwhelming odds, and that in itself was victory enough. As the dust settled and the machinery hummed back to life, the reality of their situation punched Leora square in the gut. She and Eric had just declared war on an intergalactic powerhouse, with all the subtlety of a drunken elephant on a unicycle. It was quite the accomplishment, if you were into pyrotechnic suicide missions. The calm after the technological storm was short-lived. A low, ominous thrumming, think of it as the universe's way of clearing its throat menacingly, signaled that their little fireworks display had not gone unnoticed. You hear that? Eric asked, his voice laced with the kind of excitement that was usually reserved for lunatics talking about their favorite conspiracy theories. Yeah, Leora replied, her fingers itching for something to do, preferably involving a quick escape route. That's the sound of 1,000 alien bureaucrats realizing they have a paperwork nightmare on their hands. Or maybe just Xylox realizing we've been bad little humans, Illy chimed in, his grin almost infectious. Wonder if he'll send us to bed without supper. Before they could further ponder what cosmic grounding looked like, the door to the data chamber slid open with the kind of whine that made you think it was due for some WD-40 and a therapist. Xylox floated in, his alien countenance managing to look both severe and slightly inconvenienced, like a school principal who'd just caught his favorite troublemakers setting off a cherry bomb in the toilet. Ah, Xylox, Leora greeted, mustering up a smile that was about as friendly as a shark's. Didn't hear you buzz in. I see you're up to your usual antics, Xylox said, managing to sound both bored and disappointed. We have discussed this, Leora. Humans must evolve. Yeah, we must have missed that in the memo, Eric said, folding his arms. Besides, evolving these days just means learning to navigate through your surveillance without tripping the wire. Xylox's eyes narrowed. Well, narrowed as much as alien eyes could in a face that looked like it had been designed by someone on a bender with a new set of geometry tools. You're clever, but you're also foolish. You cannot win. Winning is overrated, Illy said, waving his hand dismissively. We're more about style points. Xylox floated closer, his presence casting a surreal shadow over the room. Your actions have consequences. Leora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Consequences like what exactly? Like imprisonment, Xylox replied almost cheerfully. But first a little chat, Eric snorted. You mean an interrogation? Tomato, tomato, Xylox said with something that could have been a shrug. We'll start with Leora. The rest of you, kindly remain where you are. As two alien guards appeared, escorting Leora out with a grip that suggested hugs were not part of their training, she glanced back at Eric and Illy. Their expressions said it all. We're screwed, but at least we're funny about it. The holding cell was not what Leora had expected. She'd imagined something out of a dystopian nightmare, cold, damp, and featuring an abundance of rusty iron bars. Instead, she found herself in a sterile cube with soft lighting and an even softer chair, as if her captors were more concerned about her lumbar support than her containment. Nice digs, she said to Xylox, who watched her from across a transparent barrier. Very IKEA. Do I get a complimentary breakfast with my stay? Xylox ignored the bait. Leora, you have been a thorn in our side for too long. We require a solution. Thought you aliens were all about the peaceful negotiations. Isn't that why you decided to turn us into your pet project? Peaceful, yes. But it's hard to negotiate with people determined to crawl back into chaos. Leora leaned back, crossing her arms with a bravado that belied her nerves. Chaos is what we do best. You should see us at a Black Friday sale. Your defiance is amusing, Xylox said, not smiling. But it's also futile. If it's so futile, why are you talking to me instead of just squishing us like bugs? Xylox sighed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. Despite your insolence, we find your species intriguing. Your refusal to adapt, while frustrating, is also captivating. You know, it's almost charming how you talk about us like a science experiment gone wrong. Perhaps, Xylox admitted. But you must understand that your actions have consequences. Today's chaos has already caused disruption. Good, Leora said, her defiance sparking like a live wire. That was kind of the point. Besides, chaos is a great equalizer. And yet, here you are, equalized in captivity, she shrugged. Details? Back in the monastery, Eric and Illy were having a philosophical debate over the merits of remaining seated versus pacing like caged animals. Pacing isn't going to make this any better, Illy said, leaning back in his chair with the air of a man pretending the world wasn't on fire for a minute longer. Might as well save your energy. Yeah, well, sitting still feels too much like giving up, Eric replied, his footsteps a rhythmic counterpoint to the machinery's hum. What do you think they'll do to Leora? Illy asked, his tone carefully casual. Probably lecture her about the benefits of conforming, Eric said, rolling his eyes, and then try to teach her to fetch. Fetch is hard. She's more of a bite the hand that feeds you kind of gal. They lapsed into silence, the weight of their situation pressing down like a bad hangover. They needed a plan, but with Leora in alien hands, their options were as limited as free Wi-Fi in a black hole. We have to do something, Eric finally said, his jaw set in a way that spoke of desperation and determination in equal measure. Illy nodded, agreed. But we need to be smart about it. No more running with scissors. Right, we're going to need a distraction, a bigger one. And how exactly do you suggest we outdo our last performance? Eric grinned, the kind of grin that promised trouble. We could always set off a fire alarm. Illy chuckled, shaking his head. And then we'll yell fire in a crowded theater. Great plan. Hey, desperate times, remember. Just make sure this time we don't end up setting ourselves on fire. Meanwhile, Leora sat in her cell, contemplating the bizarre turn her life had taken. She half expected Xylox to return with a clipboard and start asking her opinion on socio-political dynamics in enclosed societies. Instead, the alien returned with a simple question. Why resist? Because I can't stand the idea of being someone else's pet, Leora shot back. We're not robots, Xylox. We don't do well with programming. Yet you seem programmed to resist. Leora laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Yeah, well, maybe resistance is our factory setting. Xylox studied her, his alien gaze unsettling yet not entirely unkind. Your species fascinates us. You remind us of ourselves before we evolved beyond violence. Remind me never to invite you to our history classes, Leora said with a snort. We've had a few rough patches. Indeed, Xylox acknowledged. But you must understand our intentions are to guide, not to harm. Guide us into submission, you mean. Xylox hovered closer, the barrier between them feeling more symbolic than physical. It's not submission we seek, it's harmony. Yeah, well, harmony sounds a lot like silence to me, and I've never been good at shutting up. The alien seemed to consider her words, his discomfort palpable. Perhaps there is more to learn from you than we anticipated. Just give us a chance to prove we're worth the trouble, Leora said, surprising herself with the earnestness seeping into her voice. We're messy, sure, but we're not lost. Xylox regarded her for a long moment, his inscrutable expression giving nothing away. I will consider your words. But know this, the path you choose will determine your future. Considering how well our past has gone, the future should be a walk in the park, Leora replied, her sarcasm masking the hope that maybe, just maybe, they had a shot. Back in the monastery, chaos was brewing, the kind that had nothing to do with aliens or existential dread, but everything to do with a couple of determined humans refusing to back down. Okay, Eric said, tapping a finger against his chin. If we can access the mainframe, we might be able to send out a false signal. Make them think there's a bigger threat elsewhere, and here I thought you were going to suggest throwing rocks at them, Illy said, raising an eyebrow. That's plan B, Eric deadpanned, but rocks are hard to come by in space. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Illy muttered, grabbing the tools they'd need. All right, let's see if we can pull this off without blowing ourselves to kingdom come. The two of them worked in tense silence, the atmosphere loaded with the kind of determination that made you think anything was possible. And maybe it was, if they just believed hard enough and ignored how much everything seemed to be going to hell around them. Okay, so what's our exit strategy once this goes off? Illy asked, his hands deftly working the console. Eric paused, realization dawning like a bad punchline. Hadn't thought that far. Great, we'll wing it then. Since when have we ever done anything else? With a final keystroke, their plan was set in motion. All they could do now was wait and hope their gamble paid off. Leora's cell door opened, and Xylox reappeared, his expression unreadable. You have been granted a reprieve. Just like that? Leora asked, suspicious and hopeful in equal measure. Not quite, we expect cooperation. Leora stood, feeling a strange sense of victory. Well, as long as that cooperation means we get a little say in our own damn lives, I think we can work something out. Xylox nodded, his demeanor softening. Perhaps there is hope for your kind yet. Just don't expect miracles, Leora warned. We're still human, after all. As she left the cell, a renewed sense of purpose surged through her. They weren't out of the woods yet. If anything, they'd just entered the thickest part. But they'd survived another day, and that was something. It wasn't victory, but it sure felt like it. Back in the monastery with Eric and Illy, the trio shared a silent understanding. They were still in the fight, and that meant everything. What tomorrow held was anybody's guess, but they'd face it like they did everything else, with grit, humor, and the kind of stubbornness that got humanity into space in the first place. Looks like we're still in business, Eric said, his grin wide. For now, Illy cautioned. Let's not get too comfortable. Comfortable's overrated anyway, Leora said, her smile matching theirs. Let's see what kind of trouble we can stir up next. As they prepared for whatever came next, they knew one thing for certain. No matter how dark the hour, they'd keep fighting. They had no choice. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The soft hum of alien machinery was like the omnipresent background score of a particularly awful space opera. Leora found herself drumming her fingers against the cold surface of the interrogation table, a subconscious tick that occasionally earned her an irritated glance from Xylox. Not that she cared much. Irritating him was the only decent entertainment since holovids were out of the question in Alien Captivity 101. So, what's on today's menu? More condescending lectures on the benefits of obedience, or are you finally going to tell me why you guys are so obsessed with us? Leora asked, her voice laced with the kind of sarcasm that could burn through steel. Xylox didn't rise to the bait immediately. Maybe he was learning. We have considered your suggestion of allowing more autonomy. Great. So you'll let me decide which cell I want to rot in, Leora retorted. Before Xylox could respond with some cryptic alien wisdom, the door slid open to reveal Caldrix, an alien scientist Leora had seen skulking around before, usually muttering to himself in a way that suggested his internal monologue was a lot more colorful than protocol allowed. Xylox, I need to speak with Leora, Caldrix said, his voice carrying the clipped efficiency of someone who tolerated nonsense about as well as Leora tolerated captivity. Xylox hesitated, which was about as much resistance as Leora had ever seen from the guy. Very well. But keep it brief, Caldrix nodded, waiting until Xylox left the room before he turned to Leora, his clandestine demeanor suggesting that her day was about to get a lot more interesting. I understand you have a reputation for challenging authority, Caldrix began, his tone almost admiring. Reputation, is that what they're calling it now? Leora asked, raising an eyebrow. I thought it was just being a pain in the ass. Caldrix chuckled, a sound that was unsettling yet reassuring in its rarity. We have been observing your interactions, Leora, and some of us, he hesitated, as if weighing the risk of what he was about to say, question the ethics of our pacification program. Leora leaned forward, interest piqued. Are you saying there's dissension in the ranks? Because that would be about the best news I've heard all year. Not publicly, of course, but there are those among us who believe that the human spirit, if I may call it that, is something worth preserving. Wow, Caldrix, didn't peg you for a sentimentalist, Leora said, hiding a surge of tentative hope beneath layers of skepticism. He gave her a measured look. Sentiment has little to do with it. It is about survival. Yours and surprisingly ours. You guys afraid of a little human rebellion? Leora asked, feigning innocence. More afraid of what will happen if we stifle it completely, Caldrix replied, his candor disarming. Leora studied him for a moment, her mind working faster than a gambling addict on payday. So, what's the plan? Rally the troops and storm the metaphorical Bastille. Caldrix allowed himself a small smile, something close to camaraderie. Nothing so grandiose. I've developed a countermeasure, a way to reverse the modifications that have been imposed on your people. Let me guess, you need a test subject, Leora said, already knowing the answer. I need a collaborator, Caldrix corrected. Someone who understands chaos. You came to the right place, Leora said, her grin the kind that promised trouble. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Back in the monastery, Brother Illy was doing his best impersonation of a disgruntled chef, pots clanging like a death toll as he tried, unsuccessfully, to make something edible out of alien rations and what he hoped was a potato. It's like trying to make a soufflé out of sawdust, he grumbled, stirring the pot with the enthusiasm one reserved for tax returns and dental appointments. At least you're not setting the kitchen on fire, Eric said, lounging in a chair with his feet propped up, the picture of a man at peace with his impending doom. Yet, Illy muttered, eyeing the stove as if it might spontaneously combust just to spite him. Eric chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that filled the room. You know, I think they've finally broken me. I'm starting to find your cooking tolerable. Desperation does strange things to a man, Illy replied, ladling a questionable concoction into a bowl with all the grace of a condemned man taking his last meal. As Eric took a cautious sip, he grimaced but didn't spit it out, a testament to either his bravery or his declining standards. Not bad. I think my tongue just went numb. That means it's working, Illy said with a smirk. Their banter was interrupted by the sound of the data console beeping, a noise that had come to mean anything from an incoming message to the universe deciding it was done with them. Eric leaned over, tapping the console with the ease of someone who'd spent far too much time jury-rigging alien tech. We've got something. Looks like a message from Leora. Finally, some good news, Illy said, wiping his hands on an apron that had seen better days. What's she saying? Eric scanned the message, his brow furrowing. She's found an ally, some alien scientist who thinks we're worth saving. They've got a plan to reverse the modifications. Guess that means we're back in business, Illy said, his voice tinged with hope despite himself. Provided we don't screw it up, Eric replied, though the familiar glint of determination was back in his eyes, the kind that had gotten them into this mess to begin with. Illy grinned, a manic, hopeful sort of grin that promised chaos just around the corner. When have we ever done anything else? Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Leora's nerves were jangling like cheap jewelry as she followed Caldrix through a maze of corridors, each one identical to the last. It was a wonder anyone got anywhere in this place without a detailed map and a decent sense of direction. So how many of your kind are in on this little conspiracy? Leora asked, trying to gauge just how unorthodox Caldrix's proposal was. More than you would expect, Caldrix said, his voice low as if the walls had ears. Given their situation, they probably did. That's not saying much, Leora replied. I expect zero. Caldrix gave her a sideways glance, his expression inscrutable. You may find that your species has more allies than you realize. That's comforting, Leora said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. So where are we headed? The data chamber. I need you to access your people's history, understand their spirit. Sounds like a terrible self-help seminar, Leora quipped, trying to shake off the unease that came with the knowledge that their entire future might hinge on this moment. As they entered the data chamber, Leora was struck by the eerie beauty of the holographic projections. Images of Earth's past flickered in the air, ghostly and vibrant, a reminder of everything they stood to lose. Caldrix began inputting commands at the console, his fingers dancing over the keys with practiced precision. This program will simulate the brain patterns of your kind before the modifications. We need to see if the countermeasure can reawaken those instincts. Leora watched, a mix of awe and skepticism battling within her. And if it doesn't work, do we just go back to being lab rats? Caldrix paused, his expression grave. If it fails, then we have lost nothing but time. But if it succeeds, it may be the key to your freedom. No pressure, Leora muttered, stepping closer to the console. All right, let's do this. As the program initiated, the room was filled with the hum of machinery, the holographic projections shifting to reflect the new data. Leora felt a strange connection to the images, a deep-rooted part of her stirring as if awakening from a long slumber. "Do you feel it?" Caldrix asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Leora nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "Yeah, it feels like home." The moment hung between them, fragile and profound, as the data continued to stream, each image a testament to human resilience. It was a flicker of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit burned bright. "We may just pull this off," Caldrix said, his tone a mix of disbelief and determination. "You better hope so," Leora replied, a fierce grin lighting her face. "Because if we don't, I'm coming back to haunt you." Caldrix chuckled softly, a sound that was almost human in its warmth. "I have no doubt that you would." Back in the monastery, Eric and Illy prepared for the next phase of their plan. The knowledge that Leora was working on a countermeasure was the kind of news that could make even the most cynically inclined feel a spark of optimism. "So what's the plan for when we get out of this?" Illy asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp with intent. Eric shrugged, a lazy grin on his face. "Figure out a way to make sure it never happens again." "Not exactly what I had in mind," Illy replied, though the humor in his voice betrayed his attempt at seriousness. Eric laughed, a sound that was genuine and infectious. "We'll play it by ear. We've done all right so far." "All right? You call this all right?" Illy gestured around the room, his expression incredulous. "Well, we're still breathing, aren't we?" Eric said, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "True," Illy conceded, shaking his head. "Just make sure the next plan involves less alien captivity and more vacation time." "Deal," Eric said, his grin widening. "Now let's see if we can help Leora before the universe decides it's done with us." With renewed purpose, the two men set to work, their focus unwavering. They were on the brink of something monumental, and though the path ahead was fraught with danger, they faced it with the kind of courage that had fueled their rebellion from the start. As they prepared to make their next move, Leora and Caldrix were doing the same, their unlikely alliance a beacon of hope in a universe that had long since forgotten what hope looked like. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Leora dared to believe that they might just stand a chance. And as the images of Earth's past flickered around her, she knew that no matter what happened next, they would face it together, humans, aliens, and all the chaos and grit that came with them. "So," Leora said, eyeing the tangle of wires and alien tech that was supposed to save their collective asses, "we just plug this thing in and hope it doesn't blow us to kingdom come." Caldrix nodded, his expression as calm as a bomb technician on Valium. "Essentially, yes." "Great," Eric muttered, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Always wanted to be a guinea pig in a sci-fi horror flick." Leora glanced over at him, her usual sarcasm tempered by a rare flash of sincerity. "Hey, if we're going to go out, might as well do it with style. Or at least a good explosion," Illy chimed in, ever the optimist when it came to catastrophic outcomes. "I've always pictured my demise to be spectacular. Can we not talk about dying?" Leora grumbled, fiddling with a circuit that looked way too precarious for comfort. "I'm trying to concentrate on not getting us killed." "Fine, fine," Eric said, pretending to zip his lips. "Consider me a paragon of silence." Caldrix took a step back, surveying their improvised setup with all the enthusiasm of a man about to defuse a live grenade. "Once activated, the countermeasure will send a signal to the orbiting satellites. It should reset the modifications. Theoretically." "Theoretically," Illy echoed, the word dripping with doubt. "Because nothing says guaranteed success like a good theory." Leora rolled her eyes, focusing on the task at hand. The data cylinders, ancient relics from Earth's past, hummed softly as if awakening from a millennia-long slumber. She could almost feel the weight of history pressing down on them, 1,000 stories demanding to be heard. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her head. "Let's do this." Caldrix nodded, his fingers moving swiftly across the console. The room buzzed with energy, the hum of alien machinery rising to a crescendo. "Once the signal is deployed," Caldrix warned, "the authorities will know. We'll have limited time before they react." "Better make it count then," Leora replied, her eyes sparking with defiance. As the final command was executed, the room was bathed in a blinding light. The countermeasure was active, and there was no turning back. In the depths of the monastery, Xylox paced like a caged beast, his irritation palpable. The humans were up to something, he could feel it, and his patience, never abundant to begin with, was wearing thin. "Monitor their activities," he barked at a subordinate, his alien voice grating like nails on a chalkboard. "I want to know their every move." His underling nodded, scuttling away to do his bidding. Xylox's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the surveillance feeds, each screen a window into the rebellion lurking beneath the surface. "We should have crushed them when we had the chance," he muttered, mostly to himself. "Foolish to think they would submit so easily." Back in the data chamber, Leora and her ragtag band of rebels were basking in the momentary triumph. The countermeasure had triggered a cascade of reactions, resetting the modifications and restoring a semblance of autonomy to humanity. Feel anything different? Illy asked, eyes darting around as if expecting a sudden epiphany. I feel angry, Eric said, a slow grin spreading across his face. And I think I like it. Welcome back to the club, Leora said, punching him playfully on the arm. Now let's get out of this tin can before Xylox decides to drop by for a friendly chat. Caldrix, ever the voice of reason, interrupted their jubilation. We should move quickly. The authorities will soon realize what's happened. Never a dull moment, Leora quipped, already heading for the exit. Let's make tracks. As they navigated the labyrinthine corridors, the sound of alarms began to wail, a discordant symphony heralding their impending doom. That's our cue, Illy said, picking up the pace. Nothing like a good panic button to get the blood pumping. The group moved with a sense of urgency, their footsteps echoing through the halls. They were close to escape, tantalizingly close, when Xylox and his goons finally caught up with them. Going somewhere, Xylox sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. Actually, yeah, Leora said, not missing a beat. We heard there's a sale on Freedom and thought we'd check it out. Xylox's expression darkened, his patience snapping like an overstressed wire. You've sealed your fate, human. This ends now. Funny, Eric said, stepping forward, his posture defiant. I was about to say the same thing. Only mine involves less monologuing. Caldrix, standing beside them, spoke quietly, his voice a steady undercurrent. We need a distraction, something to buy us time. On it, Illy said, a wicked grin plastered across his face. Without warning, he hurled a makeshift explosive, a concoction of alien tech and human ingenuity, at Xylox and his cronies. The explosion was small, but it did the trick. Smoke filled the corridor, obscuring vision and sowing chaos among the enemy ranks. Run, Leora shouted, taking advantage of the confusion. They barreled down the hallway, adrenaline fueling their flight. Behind them, Xylox's curses echoed, a promise of retribution that would never be fulfilled, not if they had anything to say about it. The monastery's exit loomed ahead, a gateway to freedom. But standing between them and salvation were more of Xylox's minions, their expressions ranging from mildly annoyed to outright homicidal. This is it, Eric said, brandishing a makeshift weapon. Our last stand. Better make it a good one, Leora replied, her voice a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Wouldn't want to disappoint. The ensuing battle was a blur of fists, feet, and fervor. Humans and aliens clashed in a cacophony of violence, each side hell-bent on victory. Leora fought with the kind of recklessness that bordered on suicidal, her every move fueled by the desperate need to survive. Illy, not far behind, wielded his weapon with surprising dexterity, his usual sarcasm replaced by grim determination. In the midst of the chaos, Caldrix found himself face-to-face with one of his own kind. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a recognition of shared guilt and unspoken understanding. You fight for them, the alien asked, disbelief coloring his voice. I fight for all of us, Caldrix replied, his tone resolute. For a future where we're not defined by our past. With that, the battle resumed, each participant driven by their own reasons, their own demons. And as the dust began to settle, it became clear that the tide was turning. One by one, the aliens fell, their resolve crumbling under the relentless assault. Leora and her friends fought with a tenacity born of desperation, refusing to yield, refusing to give in. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The last of Xylox's minions lay defeated, the path to freedom clear at last. We did it, Leora breathed, disbelief mingling with triumph. Of course we did, Eric said, his voice hoarse but triumphant. Never doubted it for a second. Speak for yourself, Illy muttered, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. Pretty sure I doubted it several times. Caldrix, standing among the fallen, looked at his human allies with something akin to admiration. You've proven what I always suspected, he said quietly. You're more resilient than anyone gave you credit for. Yes, well, Leora replied, brushing off the compliment with characteristic insouciance. We're stubborn like that. With the path to freedom open, they stepped out into the alien world, a place that was at once familiar and foreign. The sky above was vast and unyielding, stretching out in every direction. It was a reminder of the challenges still ahead, but also of the possibilities. And as they took their first steps into a new future, Leora couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Not the naive kind that assumed everything would be perfect from here on out, but the kind that knew they would keep fighting, keep pushing, until they carved out a place for themselves. Okay, team, Leora said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Let's see what kind of trouble we can get into next. And with that, they moved forward, ready to face whatever the universe threw their way. Back in the control room, Xylox seethed, his rage a palpable thing. This isn't over, he vowed, his voice a low snarl. They will pay for this insolence, but deep down, a small part of him couldn't help but admire their tenacity. It was a grudging respect, one he would never voice aloud. For now, though, he would bide his time, waiting for the moment when he could strike back. And as he watched the surveillance feeds flicker and die, he knew that the game was far from over. The humans had won this round, but the battle for the future had only just begun. The monastery loomed behind them like a relic from a forgotten age, its stone walls etched with the scars of countless confrontations, both physical and existential. With the aliens' influence on the wane, it now stood as a monument to human resilience, or maybe just as something for pigeons to crap on. Either way, it had survived, much like them, against all odds. Leora took a deep breath, her lungs filling with the fresh air of freedom, a rare commodity these days, and one she intended to savor, even if it did still smell faintly of alien body odor. She glanced at her ragtag group of survivors, each one battered and bruised, yet undeniably alive. Well, I guess we did it. We messed with the universe and lived to tell the tale. Eric snorted, wiping a trickle of blood from his forehead. Yeah, because I always dreamt of being a footnote in some alien history book. Here lies humanity, persistent, annoying, and really good at finding ways to blow stuff up. Illy chuckled, cradling his own makeshift weapon like it was a beloved family pet. And to think all this time we could have just asked them nicely to leave. Sure, Leora said, rolling her eyes. Why didn't we think of that? Excuse me, Mr. Xylox, sir, would you mind terribly buggering off? I'm sure that'd work like a charm. Caldrix was the last to join them, a collection of alien tech clutched in his hands, his expression one of quiet resolve. You've got a point, Leora, he said. Sometimes asking nicely isn't enough. Sometimes, well, you just need to make sure you've got the bigger stick. Or a stick that goes boom, Illy interjected, gesturing to the smoldering remains of Xylox's forces. Those worked too. The landscape before them stretched wide and wild, an expanse of possibilities marred by the occasional charred alien corpse. It was a land they'd have to rebuild, a world they'd have to reclaim from the ashes of occupation. But if there was one thing humans were good at, it was making something out of nothing, or at the very least making a mess of it. Leora turned to face the monastery one last time, its silhouette stark against the sky. So, what now? We throw a party, start a new utopia. Or just take a long nap and hope someone else sorts this mess out, Eric shrugged. A nap sounds good, but knowing us, we'd wake up to find someone else has taken over. Maybe cats this time. Ha, maybe, Leora said. Imagine it, a world where our feline overlords demand nothing but worship and maybe a few catnip toys. Illy nodded thoughtfully. Could be worse. At least they wouldn't be trying to rewrite our DNA. Caldrix cleared his throat, drawing their attention. Humor aside, we should think about what comes next. The reset has given humanity a chance to redefine itself without alien interference. But that's a double-edged sword. Freedom means responsibility. Mess it up and we won't have Xylox to blame anymore. Leora frowned, contemplating Caldrix's words. Yes, I get it. It's like winning a free trip to a new planet and realizing you're the tour guide. Only nobody's bothered to write the itinerary. Exactly, Caldrix replied. But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's time to stop relying on others to define who we are. There was a pause as they all let that thought sink in, the enormity of it settling over them like a blanket. Then, predictably, Eric broke the silence. So, anyone know how to farm or fix a spaceship? Because I think we're going to need both. Farming, not so much, Leora said with a smirk. But I'm sure we can find a YouTube video for ship repairs, assuming the internet is still a thing. Lee sighed, glancing up at the sky. You know, when this all started, I thought the worst part would be losing the internet. Turned out the worst was actually the food. You mean Brother Ellie's cooking? Eric asked, feigning shock. I thought that was a bonus. Who doesn't love mystery stew with a side of whatever that was? Caldrix actually grinned at that, a rare sight. To be fair, his cooking did have a certain, unique quality. Edible, Leora said, in the same way a brick is edible. If you're desperate enough, the conversation dwindled as they marched onward, each step carrying them further from the past and closer to whatever future they might carve out. The path ahead was uncertain, littered with obstacles both real and metaphorical, but the weight of possibility was invigorating. This is it then, Leora said at last, her voice carrying a note of finality. A fresh start. Just one request, Eric added. Can we try not to screw it up this time? No promises, Leora replied, a wry smile on her lips, but we'll give it our best shot. As they moved forward, a renewed sense of purpose settled over them. The universe was a vast and indifferent place, but for now, this little corner of it was theirs to shape. It was a daunting task, one that would demand everything they had and more. Yet, as they stood on the brink of this new era, they felt ready. Behind them, the monastery faded from view, its enduring presence a testament to the strength they'd found within themselves. It was a reminder of where they'd been and a beacon for where they were headed. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt like something they could embrace rather than fear. All right, Leora said, clapping her hands together with mock enthusiasm. Let's see what kind of trouble we can get into next. No rest for the rebellious, after all. With that, they continued their journey, the horizon stretching out before them like a blank canvas, waiting to be filled with the colors of their choosing. And as they walked, each step echoed with the promise of a new beginning, one forged in hardship and tempered by hope. In the eerie quiet of the monastery's abandoned halls, Brother Illy hummed to himself, his hands busy tidying up the remnants of their recent escapade. He was content here, amidst the dust and shadows, content in the knowledge that his friends were out there, forging their own paths. He paused, glancing at the ancient stone walls. Well, old girl, he said softly, addressing the monastery itself, this place will be lonely without them. But that's the way of things, isn't it? We come, we go, and the world just keeps on spinning. With a final nod, Brother Illy resumed his work, a satisfied smile on his face. The world was a vast, uncertain place, but it was theirs, and that was enough. As the sun set on the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, the group continued their journey, each step echoing with the promise of a new dawn. It was a promise they intended to keep, no matter the cost.